Okay, I'll make a start. I think Javier might come later. He's already told me that. And I'm recording anyway, so as usual, I'll put it on the YouTube channel. This is the last one, the last meeting in the series. Obviously, 4 series is each one follows a different part of the speaking. This is part 4. As I've mentioned before, this is the part of the speaking that I think most people misinterpret or misunderstand, purely because of the format. It's something that I'll explain in detail, and I'll give you some tips and technique ideas and things like that. As with all Cambridge, it's got a very strict format. It doesn't change too much. I'll go straight ahead and share with you exactly how it looks. Now you'll notice here that this, of course, is not part 4. This is part 3. Okay, but there's a very good reason that I'm showing you part 3 first. So this is a advanced exam. There are, oops, right now it's here. This is a part 3 of the exam. Sorry, and you can see that in this diagram. Hi, Nara. You can see that in this diagram, this is the part that you will do in part 3, and the question is, what might people have to consider when making these decisions? So you will have already had a discussion for about 4 minutes with your partner about making decisions. Now, the reason that that's important to identify and for me to point out is the fact that if you look at the questions in part 4, those questions are related to the topic in part 3, and in this case, that is making decisions. Okay, let me get my little pointer. Okay, so as you can see here, a lot of the questions: is it best for people to make decisions on their own or ask others for advice? Some people think it's best to plan for their lives carefully. Others prefer to make spontaneous decisions. Here again, make decisions. Take responsibilities. Obviously, part 3 here was about young people starting work, getting jobs, so it also speaks about responsibilities and work. So the questions that you get in part 4 are actually related to the topic that you've discussed in part 3. It's okay, thanks. Obviously in part 4, well, not obviously, maybe you think, you do not see the questions. These are all given to you verbally. It's a little bit of a handicap because you have to really comprehend and listen to what you've been asked. Like every time you get a question in Cambridge or even in any exam, you have to identify those key questions. This is talking about people, third person. This is asking, is it best for people? So what you're having to give in your reply is if you think it's best or not, or if you think it's better or worse or indifferent. But some of these key words need you to respond to them directly to give a good indication that you've actually comprehended and understood the question correctly. Now, what I need to let me change this screen because there's a very big difference between part 1 and part 4 questions. Now, a lot of people, by inertia, they tend to think that part 4 is very similar to part 1. Now, the only thing that's similar with part 4 and part 1 is the fact that they are questions directed at the candidates. Okay, the big difference between part 1, in part 1, the questions about you. We've done this before in the very first session. The questions about you, how you like to spend time, what you usually do at the weekends, what you did on your last birthday, future plans, etc., etc. Part 4, okay, it's the longest part of the test. It's 5 minutes. But the big difference here is that these questions are interactive. Parts 3 and 4 of the speaking test are both interactive. These questions in part 4 are they're not just questions that are directed at you so that you give a response and then that's the end of your term. No, these questions are interactive, which means that they can be discussed between, well, not can be, they should be discussed between the two candidates, okay? There's a big difference. Remember that this part of the exam remains and is still interactive. Now, something that we advise all our students to do in For Real English, when you do part 4 and part 3, because they're interactive, physically turn your chair and look at your partner. It's a small thing, but it enables you to use eye contact, body language, and it gives the impression that you're actually having a discussion or a debate with a person, rather than you looking at the question, looking at the sheet, and not physically interacting with your partner. Body language and interaction in general, in terms of eye contact and everything, is quite an important part of Cambridge. A lot of people don't know that. If you physically interact with your partner and make it a little bit more natural, you'll get more points, because it'll be regarded that you've actually interacted properly in a natural way, okay? There are 2 formats to the questions, something that we'll look at a little bit lower down in this document. I'll send you this document after the session. Okay, this, I'll go directly down to the question format, because this is an important part, and it kind of runs concurrently with this. So you have direct questions. Direct question is me, the examiner, asking you, the candidate, a question. Okay. Now in this case, we're looking at what would be this diagram here. This diagram is the direct question. This is the examiner. This is one of the candidates. The question goes from the examiner to the candidate. This candidate answers, and then what happens is, once the answer is given, and if you think about the amount of time for this part 4, 5 minutes in total, which means, from my experience and view, you should have the opportunity to answer about 3 questions, okay? But it's important to remember that if this is candidate A and they receive the first question, so let's imagine that the first question, can I move this down, is this one. Why do you think some people find it harder to make decisions than others? Okay, this candidate would answer that question. Now, there's something called a follow-up question. So after more or less a 30-second answer, 30 or 40 seconds, you can give a good, full, complete answer. These are not short answers, they're complete. Then the examiner will just simply say, they will turn to the other candidate and say, do you agree? And you, or what's your view? Now, this means that you have to respond to what your partner's answer was, but also you're responding to the same question, okay? Which brings me up to this part of the document here. Things to avoid, and I've put, don't switch off, don't turn off your brain. Don't try to rest for a while, because if you're candidate B and your partner, candidate A, receives the first question, some people switch off. They think, oh, I'll have a bit of a rest here and I'll allow my partner to answer this question. You can't do that. Very important, because you will then need to respond to the same question. And what happens many times is that this candidate receives the question, they answer 30, 40 seconds. The examiner just says, and do you agree? And then this candidate says, agree about what? Because they've not listened to the question or the answer, okay? There's another very good reason why you have to listen to your partner's question and answer. That is some of the key language that I've put here, okay? So like in part 3, you're expected to give your opinions and maybe ask your partner about their opinions. Try to avoid using too often things like I like and in my opinion. A little bit boring, everybody will be using them, overusing them. And so as I described in part 3 and in some cases part 2, when you need to give an opinion, make sure that you have chosen your key 2 or 3 opinion phrases. I like, for example, as far as I'm concerned, in my honest point of view, or from my view, in my view, sorry, from my point of view and in my view. I also like things like, to be totally honest, I reckon. Now you can use I reckon as a synonym for I think. It's a little bit more colloquial, it sounds a bit more natural, again you'll get more points. Variation is key, and that's the same for all of the parts of Cambridge, whether it's writing or speaking. They want to hear you use variation. Because this is an interactive part, agreeing and disagreeing becomes very important. Again, please don't think that you always have to agree. Try to disagree with something that your partner said, right? One of the main reasons, probably the main reason, that this is important, I say here, key things to avoid. Don't switch off. Avoid not listening to your partner's question and answer, okay? Because when your partner receives the question and the examiner turns to you and says, do you agree? If you use reported speech in this moment, you're going to get points. Reported speech shows the examiner that you've listened to your partner's answer, okay? Now, what is reported speech? We know this, so you probably know it, but I'm going to share with you anyway. So imagine I'm candidate B, my partner goes first, and then the examiner turns to me and says, and Christian, do you agree? Okay. Now, the first words that come out of my mouth is going to be reported speech, because when I use reported speech, I show that I've been paying attention to what my partner just said. So I would say something like this. I'm going to use Tessar as an example. Well, as Tessar just mentioned, okay. Now, I don't need to go into loads of detail, but I do always give my explain, detail, explain, describe. Right? I believe that if you just use one or two from this section of four, this group of four reporting verbs, you're going to give yourself a good chance to get some more points. Instead of saying, as Tessar said, as Ainara said, okay, said is okay, you're using reported speech, and you would also be showing the examiner that you've listened to your partner, but use variation. Don't use said, because it's similar in this case to I think. I think becomes repetitive to boring. This is advanced and first certificate, and I think that in both of them, even though first certificate is B2 and it's intermediate, you should be able to demonstrate that you've got more variation than that. And these verbs, as you well know, are not particularly complicated. Instead of saying said, you could use suggested, mentioned, explained, or described. And then you, of course, describe a little bit what your partner has just said. You can't, it has to be linked. You can't say, well, as Tessar said, and then say something completely different. It has to be linked. This brings me on to the other part, the other way of getting some good extra points. Can you paraphrase, okay? Let me just put here. Reported speech. Okay, paraphrasing, you use it mixed with the reported speech. So let's just take an example. There are always lots of key words, and some of them that are very typical in Cambridge are adjectives for things like difficult, important, useful, easy, advantages or disadvantages, okay? Now, if you can paraphrase those typical adjectives or paraphrase something that your partner said, you'll get more points. The examiners will notice it. They're trained to try to pick up on these things. So imagine, let's just imagine that Tessar said that he thinks that for young people, making decisions is incredibly important, okay? Then the examiner turns to me and says, Christian, do you agree? I'm going to say, well, as Tessar, oops, I'm not going to say incredibly important, I'm going to say vital, okay? I'm paraphrasing what my partner said. If you can do this, this is a little bit the creme de la creme, I suppose, because It's not easy. You have to do it in the moment. You have to identify what your partner said and then think to yourself, can I paraphrase this? If you can't paraphrase it, please don't obsess about paraphrasing. The most important thing is that you use reported speech to make it very clear to the examiner that you have been listening to your partner's answer and now you're going to respond and you're going to agree or disagree. And even when you do this, you can look and interact with your partner. Okay, it's something. It's very important, and a lot of people don't realise that this part of the exam is also interactive. I'm going to go back to the other diagram, the document here, because that's only one format of question. Okay, this is the direct question with the follow-up question. Okay, so this is examiner asking candidate and then saying to the other candidate, do you agree? What do you think? Do you feel the same? What's your view? And you have to respond. Now, the other question, the other type of question is what we call the open question. This is the question that throws a lot of people. They sort of think, what's happening here? And the reason that it throws a lot of people, it confuses them, is that the examiner does not directly ask either candidate A or candidate B. He or she gives an open question for the two candidates to answer openly. It doesn't matter who starts. That's not important, but they give you a question and it's almost as if their instruction is, this is my question, go ahead and debate it between yourselves, okay? So in this part, you'll physically see when you do the exam, this open question in advanced, it will definitely happen once or maybe more. In first certificate, it will happen once. It will usually be the third question in first certificate. In advanced, they might ask you two open questions. So be aware, make sure that you're ready for it, okay? And when they ask the question, you see their head and their eyes, their eye contact, physically moving from candidate A to candidate B. And that's because it's an open question, not directed at one person specifically. So try to avoid, and I put it here, asking who the open question is aimed at. What happens a lot of the time in the open question, the examiner asks the question and one of the candidates says, is this question for me or my partner? It's for both of you, okay? So don't make that mistake. Now, you might decide to say to your partner, would you like to answer first? Do you mind if I answer first? This is using interaction, okay? So try to do that. Let me go back to the whiteboard, okay? We're talking here about the open question. So there are some other useful phrases as well when you receive an open question. So if you get a question that's aimed at two people, you can interact immediately and you might say to your partner, would you like to start? Do you mind if I start? Or you might use something a little bit more direct, which I actually like. And I like to say, I don't know about you, but I feel that, and then I would go on to answer the question. Now, these are very useful phrases in when you're doing an interaction, because what this one does here, it demonstrates that you very clearly are going to answer the question. However, because you say to your partner, well, I don't know about you, but I feel that decisions are sometimes quite difficult, blah, 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 but it's vital and everything. You include your partner. You make it very clear that when you've finished your answer, that you expect a response from your partner, okay? And so this helps. I don't think I need to give you any more than that. Let me think if there's another one. Again, this is very similar. I'm not sure what you think, but from my view, from my point of view, I think, I believe, la 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 la, and you give your answer. Now, so this is important. Make sure that you interact. Make sure that you are aware that one of the questions at least will be this open format. It's not directed at anyone in particular. But then there's something else important to remember, and that is that particularly the open question, but also any question in part 4, particularly the open question. If the examiner asks you a question, an open question, and candidate A answers first and then candidate B responds, please don't think that that is where the discussion for that particular question has to end. It can continue, okay? This interaction when two people answer a question could go backwards and forwards 2, 3, or 4 times, okay? If you feel that you have something to add and something to discuss and disagree again with your partner, don't hesitate to do so. You can, okay? A lot of people in this part of the exam think that the question comes from the examiner, candidate A gives his or her answer, then candidate B gives his or her response, and then it finishes. That is not entirely true. It might finish, you might have nothing else to say, and if that's the case, the examiner might ask another question so that you use the full 5 minutes. But what I suggest is, especially with the open question, you debate that question for longer than you debated the other questions. It can continue, it can keep going, okay? So it's something really important to remember. What are the other things here? Like I've said here, don't switch off. A lot of people, quite understandably, when it gets to part 4 in the speaking exam, you might be quite mentally tired and a bit drained. Just try to push yourself for the last 5 minutes and make sure that you stay very much focused and listening to your partner's question and answer, so that you don't switch off and try to just relax for a while. Let me go back. Paraphrasing, just to touch on paraphrasing again. Paraphrasing is not always about finding the exact synonym. It could be about word transformation. And in fact, if you practice word transformation for paraphrasing, you also give yourself some good practice for some of the other parts of the exam, like the use of English part 3 and 4, where you have to transform words and use different words. It's paraphrasing, basically. And what I mean by this is to be vital. It's vital. If your partner uses an adjective, maybe you can change it to a noun. Okay. A really simple example is if Thessar says, it's very important, I might, instead of saying very important or vital is a good use of a synonym, an adjective, but you could use the importance, okay, of something, okay? That's just another way of paraphrasing. It doesn't have to be a synonym, which is sometimes in the moment difficult to find, but if you can adapt the word, and if it starts as an adjective and you change it into a noun, or you change it into an adverb, which is importantly, okay, you're going to get points. Basically, they will notice it, and they'll pick up the fact that you've done that, and you'll get points. I want to just go for the last few minutes back to the, where are we? Back to the sample exams, just to make sure that you're all aware and you can see it properly. I don't know if any of you, I don't know if I know you're doing advanced. So just going back, excuse me, to basically making sure that you identify the questions properly. You can see here that this is a sample what the examiner sees, what they have, and the examiner will choose from this list of questions. The list may be a little bit longer, but in any case, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, make sure that you give good full answers. These are not short answers. 2 candidates who fail to give long enough answers might end up having 5 questions asked. I think that the logical perfect amount would be 3, but you have to remember that this would be, and they're in no particular order. The examiner will just ask the questions that they feel that they want to ask. So it'll be a question followed by a follow-up question, then a question to candidate B with a follow-up question for candidate A. Then there would be an open question where it's asked to both people in the open question format, and depending on the length of those answers, you might receive another open question if you've not quite used your 5 minutes. Obviously, you have to try to use a variety of vocabulary here. You're showing the examiners that you've got variation, you've got a knowledge of vocabulary. Think to yourself, can you use phrasal verbs, can you use collocations, and can you use any expressions? It's difficult because you don't always know what the topic will be in part 3. Here it's decisions, and in this example, in the FCE, in the first certificate, it is about attracting tourists to a town. So as you can see, these questions are about tourists, holidays. Do you think people have enough time for holidays? Why do you think people like to go away on holiday? So you've got these linked questions. That's more or less it. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I think the key things to remember in part 4 is that don't switch off. This is not like part 1 where you get a question, your partner gets a question, your partner gets another question, you get a question. These are interactive. Keep your ears open, listen to what the question is and listen to what your partner answers, respond to your partner, agree and disagree. Use a good variation of opinion phrases. In part 4, make sure that you use those structures that I've given you on the whiteboard, and I'm going to send that to you after. Well, as Cesar mentioned, well, as Ainara suggested, as Pedro explained, yes, it is vital for young people to make decisions, etc., etc. It just shows that you're paying attention. And then the other one is, can you use paraphrasing to paraphrase what your partner has said? Those are the key things. Like I said, turn your chair, make sure you look at your partner, use body language, and just on body language and also interacting and reacting. As I mentioned in the last one about part 3, when you have a discussion, it's not very typical for when one person's speaking, the other person is completely silent. We tend to use reactive words like, yeah, that's a good point, or really, if you're surprised, or I hadn't thought of that, yeah, or yeah, sure, or even just yes, yes. Those are little reactive words. They're a little bit strange, they're difficult to practice, they feel unnatural, but if you can do them, you'll help give yourself some more points because the examiners will see that you're trying to create this atmosphere and this interactive kind of atmosphere, okay, just by reacting. So try to remember those things. I'm going to do what I usually do. I'll put this on YouTube for the weekend. I think you've probably got your exams soon, 17th, is it? 17th of April or something like that. I know that there are some exams very soon. So I'll send you this, you can look. In fact, I'll put it on YouTube before the weekend, just in case there are some exams on Saturday. And I'll send you an email with the whiteboard and also this document that we've used in the session. And I'll probably also ask you to be very, very kind to us. And the only thing that I'm going to ask is that I'm going to send you a link make so that you can maybe do a Google review for us. It's just something that really helps small businesses so that we get more noticed, and hopefully people can read it and maybe get a good experience. If you think it's been worth your time, a nice review would be the only thing that I ask. So that would be great. And I hope it's been really useful. We're going to continue to do these in the last trimester. And of course, very last thing, thank you all for your time and coming. And if in the future you need any classes, you know where we are, and you've got our details. So it would be wonderful to see some of you again. So thank you all very much. I hope it's been worth it. And very good luck in your exams. Okay, so good luck. And if you use these things, you will score more points. Okay, so I hope that you all do really well. Thanks very much, and I'll see you soon. See you. Pedro. Second. Let me just finish.